Good morning, good morning, good morning, beautiful people. Good afternoon, good evening. No matter what time it is, just know this is the day that the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it. As always, God is good, and He is good all the time.
These black people who are in the South, there's always been a big question, were black people robbed of their culture, or did they preserve their authentic African culture? And what Sowell is saying is that they were robbed of their culture, and so they picked up the culture of the people around them, and the people around them were rednecks.
So today we're getting into this video that was constantly shared to me. In fact, this short clip was sent to me, and it was this guy who was talking about the evolution of culture. And from my experience, I've always had white people or non-black people be upset about me saying that black people shouldn't have to, share our culture with anyone. And I talk about culture appropriation. And I have these white people sending me this short, like, black culture isn't black culture. In fact, y'all stole y'all culture from white people. Oh, the inaccuracy in those statements is just, it's beyond me. So I thought about it. I wanted to show y'all it. So I'm going to start off with the motherfucking short so you can see what got me into it. But it made me want to look for the actual video because I figured if Joe Rogan made a motherfucking short clip on it, he got to have a video on it. So I'm going to show y'all the clip first, and then we're going to go into the video. So give me a second, and we're just going to dive in. So as you see, this is the motherfucking video. Joe Rogan stunned by Thomas Sowell, or whatever, however you pronounce his name, wisdom. It's not really wisdom, it's pure ignorance, but let's go.
When liberals look at the people in ghettos, they say, racism, that's why they're not succeeding. And Sowell is saying, no, it's not. Because if you look at this group from the West Indies, they also came from the experience of slavery. There was slavery in the West Indies. They are also black, so they also face racism, and yet they do well. So it has to be something else. And that other thing is the fact that these black people who are in the South, there's always been a big question, were black people robbed of their culture, or did they preserve their authentic African culture? And what Sowell is saying is that they were robbed of their culture, and so they picked up the culture of the people around them, and the people around them were rednecks. And if you look at the white redneck culture and the black redneck culture, they have a lot of the same values. They don't particularly respect education. They love Jesus. They use violence in their conflicts, and even Ibram X, which is, black English, is actually all from the west of England. So it's actually this...
What?
It's from the west of England.
Now, there's so much wrong with that motherfucking short, but I'm not going to waste the time to talk about it now because I know it's going to come up in the video. So I'm going to go right into this motherfucking video, and we going to motherfucking obliterate this with some pure knowledge that can literally be found in a book. Actually, let me show y'all the best motherfucking book out here that literally dates back as early as, sheesh, the 1100s. It was like the 12th century or some trash. Actually, I have the book in my motherfucking room. But this book is called Stamped from the Beginning, The Racist Ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi. This book talks about everything. The research that was put into this motherfucking book is outstanding. Ibram X. Kendi pisses off a lot of white people, which is the white people who pushes this notion that this guy just said. You know what I'm saying? You got these white people who only push motherfucking black logic that reinforces their racist ideas and their narratives. So we're gonna go into this motherfucking video. Let go.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
So, do you know Thomas Sowell?
I know that name. Why do I know that name?
Thomas Sowell is a big, famous conservative. He's at Stanford. He's at the Hoover Institute, I think. Anyway, so, within this...
One, he doesn't even give his background like that, but you just want to push the research that he's done. Seems a little biased already.
First, just to set all of this up, we should set up briefly, how does culture work, right? And the way culture works is that it, like genetic evolution, it works based on blind copying.
So what ends up happening is that you are in awe of people, right? You look up to people. And so you blindly copy the things they do. And specifically, you start by blindly copying from the outside, and then you work in.
If this nigga tries to say that black culture isn't black culture, but in fact white culture, and he's trying to push this notion that we looked up to these niggas, bro, I'm gonna have to find this raggedy dude to bust him in the face. I mean, what's his name? Hunter Maats? Yeesh.
So the first thing you do is you see someone and you're like, oh, that person's fucking amazing, that rock star, that sports star, whatever, and you start dressing like them, you start walking like them, and all of that sort of stuff. Now,
that's what white people do with black culture currently, but let's...
In a hunter-gatherer context, that would be, somebody who is a hunter or is a gatherer, and you're like, man, she finds all the best guavas. How does she do that? And then Ung fucking eats them, right?
Fucking Ung again.
Yeah. And so, you would like hang out with her, you'd sort of like shimmy up to her, you'd be seeing what she'd be doing, and she's like, oh, okay, she looks for a very particular color of guava, she, squeezes them in a certain way, and over time you learn what she's doing, and then ultimately you even learn how she's thinking. But in a large-scale society like ours, I don't meet Michael Jordan, right? Michael Jordan just becomes this sort of distant person that I idolize. And so advertisers have figured out how to hijack these mechanisms. And they know if you put a burger next to Michael Jordan's face, that I'm like, oh, I want to be like Michael Jordan, so I'm going to eat a Big Mac, right? And little children are dumb, and so they blindly copy that. Or, oh, I want to be like James Dean, he has a cigarette in his mouth, I want to blindly copy that. And we don't understand that the burger or the cigarette is not actually the key to being as successful or as cool as or as good at basketball as Michael Jordan or James Dean, right? We don't understand that that's where that comes from. So we have this tendency to blindly copy anything we can, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in a mass society, we never work our way in. We never learn the mastery, right? We just sort of remain at this sort of very superficial level. So what that means is that, where did this all start?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Where were you going with this?
Well, we're starting at...
Culture, how culture works?
Oh, yeah, how culture works. Oh, okay, so now we're going to talk about...
This nigga don't even know what the freak he's talking about. How you lose your own point?
About black people. Okay,
Jesus
great.
Christ.
Jesus Christ. So Thomas Sowell... Thomas Sowell is a black guy, right?
Okay.
And Thomas Sowell has for years and years and years been trying to fight racism. But he's been trying to fight racism by having a conversation about culture, right? And the fact that there are essentially two different sort of, we're speaking broadly here, right? But this is for the purposes of communication. We're going to tell a simple story to start off with, right? So broadly speaking, he puts two different cultures of people with dark skin next to each other. And one culture is these people from the West Indies, and one culture is this group of people who grew up in the South with slavery and all that sort of stuff. Now, what one group, the West Indies group, does really well. So a lot of the successful black people like Colin Powell, are originally from that cultural heritage. The other group is the group that you find in ghettos and African-American communities and all of that sort of stuff. They don't do well, right? They don't get good education. They, shoot each other. There are all these sorts of things. And the reason why Sowell has been telling this...
First off, let's get something clear right now. Shooting each other, black people, white people shoot each other. Latinos shoot each other. Asians shoot each other. There's this thing called close proximity killings. Statistically, you are more likely to be assaulted, to be murdered, to be raped by someone you know. It's within your, proximity. So this whole black on black crime is just racist, conservative BS. Bro, people aren't necessarily leaving their areas, what they know, their neighborhoods, to go out here and shoot, kill, murder, rape outside people. Every now and then you got those rare numbers where people get raped by people that they don't know, a complete stranger, or murdered by a complete stranger. But if you look at data, majority of those who have been abused, assaulted in any way, it has come from some they know within their proximity. The ignorance. We ain't even 5 minutes in and this nigga already coming off so stupid.
Story is because he's been trying to say, when liberals look at the people in ghettos, they say, racism, that's why they're not succeeding. And Sowell is saying, no, it's not. Because if you look at this group from the West Indies, they also came from the experience of slavery. There was slavery in the West Indies. They are also black, so they also face racism, and yet they do well. So it has to be something else. And that other thing is the fact that these black people who are in the South, there's always been a big question, were black people robbed of their culture, or did they preserve their authentic African culture? And what Sowell is saying is that they were robbed of their culture, and so they picked up the culture of the people around them, and the people around them were rednecks. And if you look at the white redneck culture and the black redneck culture, they have a lot of the same values. They don't
Black rednecks?
particularly respect education. They love Jesus. They use violence in their conflicts. And there's just, a lot of the same values and a lot of the same outcomes. And even Ebonics, which is, Black English, is actually all from the west of England. So it's actually this.
What?
It's from the west of England. So, for example, if you go to places like Cornwall, there used to be this amazing.
What? What? To say black culture doesn't exist because they love Jesus, they use violence to deal with their conflicts. They don't motherfucking prize motherfucking education. Nigga, that's just about every motherfucking poor person in America. Bro, this nigga is so dumb. Majority of the U.S. population, not even just the U.S. population, if you look at the world, majority of this motherfucking world is poor and uneducated. But if we're gonna just look at the United States, majority of this motherfucking population is poor and uneducated. Majority of this population is white. So that means majority of this population of the United States is poor, uneducated white people. But when you throw in everybody else, it's poor, uneducated. Poor and uneducated. America was created off of motherfucking murdering and come on. The United States of America, before it became the United States of America, was a place that was motherfucking, it was full of Native Americans. Full of Native Americans. Yet, to this day, to date, Native Americans only make up less than 2% of the U.S. population. Come on. There's only 2 million Native Americans in this entire country, yet this entire country belonged to them. They were massacred. Native Americans were placed into boarding schools to strip them of their culture and make them more civilized. The same thing that happened to black people, the same thing that happened to Latinos, the same thing that happened to Asian people, the same thing that happened to motherfucking outside white. When you think about it, when you look at the history of even the white people that was coming here, the Dutch, the Quakers, and all that stuff. When the Irish people decided to come here, it happened to them. When the motherfucking Slavic people, Slavic white people came here, the same thing happened to them. When the Italians came here, the same thing happened to them. You cannot. This is what happens when niggas wants to take black culture and say, no, y'all don't have culture. Everything you do, you got from us. Our music, rap, is from us. Rock and roll, us. Jazz, us. Y'all ain't create nothing. You got, this is, I already don't even want to watch the rest 14 minutes because it's just pure ignorance. This dude is so stupid. He's so stupid.
Using these amazing ads on British TV, right, for this Devon custard or whatever, and they would always say, Devon knows how they make it so creamy, and they all talk like this, right? And so it does.
Before we go any further, first off, you cannot. The West Indies is vastly different from the United States. In fact, the United States of America was the last country to abolish slavery, and these niggas didn't even want to do it. We had a whole civil war over it. A whole civil war. where the South wanted to continue slavery because they wanted to continue to benefit and profit off of slaves. That's why they motherfucking attempted to strip black people of culture. That's why they continue to attempt to strip Native Americans of their culture. And to some degree, it worked. But to some degree, it did not. Because what they don't realize is that the United States of America has always been divided by racial, lines, right? And so even with Native Americans, right? Native Americans were placed into boarding schools to strip them of their culture. Yet here it is in 2022, you can still see Native Americans participate in what? Their motherfucking culture. So therefore, you failed to strip them completely of their culture. Yes, it worked to some degree, but there's still some people that held on to it. The same thing with black people, because you got to remember, black people during slavery wasn't attending church services with white people. One of the most common sayings is that the most segregated day of the week is Sundays, because everybody go to their individual churches and spaces, right? It's the same thing back then. White people, to some degree, because you do have places in Africa that knew of Jesus. They knew of Christianity because, I mean, come on. Judaism comes out of Africa, which is black people. All shades, but black people, right? Not white, not Slavic, black. You got some light-skinned black in there, but black, right? There was people that knew of Christianity, faith and stuff, but then you had these motherfucking missionaries that used Jesus in the Bible to push their narratives. Because even the Bible says, do not take from my word nor add to it. You had people who literally took and added to God's word to use it to push narratives, right? And they tried to brainwash some people, right? And they pushed church and church and church onto people. So literally, when black people, just like Native Americans, will go into, like Native Americans, I don't think they call theirs church, but they'll go into their form of, like prayer and gathering, coming together and with their leaders and elders and such. Same thing with black people. In their churches, black people, yes, in church, white people were convinced like, oh yeah, they're in there, reading the Bible and all this other stuff. But they were still practicing their cultural practices. Behind closed doors, these people were still practicing their practices. And then stuff started to motherfreaking shapeshift, right? You cannot say that black ebonics comes from no motherfreaking England. Nigga, that's dumb. You literally pulled people from Africa, this whole entire continent, mostly southern Africa. You pull these people here, they have their own native tongue, and you force English onto them. When you force English on, have any of y'all got motherfreaking family members that don't really speak English? And over the years, you've been trying to teach them English, and then you notice that they have their own vernacular, their own colloquialisms, their own motherfreaking ways of speaking English, which white people would consider ebonics, because they're like, this ain't real English. I mean, even white people now don't even speak real English. Because what you do is you take what was given to you and you try to make sense of it with your motherfreaking idiosyncratic thoughts and way of speaking and way of, conducting life. My family's broken English ain't got squat to do with no motherfreaking English folk. That has to do with the fact that we have ancestors that came from different places around this world. They were forced to speak English, and now they're, with their accents, with their way of speaking, they make sense of it. We call it Geechee, where my family come from, which is this mix of like this Caribbean, African way of English. Broken, you cannot, no. Everyone has their own form of ebonics. Black ebonics ain't got squat to do with Latino ebonics, ain't got squat to do with Native ebonics, ain't got squat to do with white people ebonics. Let's continue.
Doesn't sound like black English, but they do say things like oi be doing that, and we be doing this, and you be doing that, and they be doing that. And so there's that use of that copula be, right? Where instead of saying I am, you are, he is, she is, they are, they just say I be, you be, we be, they be, which is the classic feature of black.
To say that somebody says we be it came from white people. That's stupid, because that's like saying walking came from white people. To some degree, there's going to be some like crossover, because at the end of the day, we're human. Ain't nothing new under the sun. This nigga ignorant as a motherfucker.
English, African American vernacular English. Right. Now, the point is that
Mind blower.
mind blower. Now, let's imagine that. How do you think that Thomas Sowell has been received by liberal America?
Liberals didn't even give a damn about black people until we forced ourselves into these spaces and said, hey, we need civil rights. And when black people began to get civil rights, that's when white people said, well, hey, we got this new group of voters that we need to flock to. So let's put out this facade that we're for them. It's the same thing with conservative politicians, right? You got poor white people flocking to claim Republican, yet Republicans don't give a damn about poor white people. Because at the end of the day, yes, race and all this stuff comes into play, but racism came into play. These racist ideas came into play as a way to justify the behaviors of those who were in higher positions of power, right? Read this motherfucking book, Stand from the Beginning, The Racist Ideas in America. Racism wasn't this thing that always exists. It came about to convince people as a justification, say, hey, you know, because at the end of the day, you can't oppress people, you can't enslave people if other people think what you're doing is wrong. It's inhumane. So what do? They convince you that it's right. It is humane because they deserve it. Here it is. You got people like Carl Linnaeus. You got people like Vladimir. You got people like Aristotle, who pushes these notions that they push these, oh, there's hierarchies of people, and there's the color theory, or there's the climate theory, right? Where Carl Linnaeus, there's these hierarchies. He made it seem like Greeks were at the top and non-Greeks are at the bottom. And so American, people was like, oh, let's take this knowledge and do the same thing with the people here. So we're gonna put, motherfucker Anglo-Saxon at the top, and all those white people that aren't Anglo-Saxons, they're at the bottom. But then we're not gonna put them completely at the bottom, because we're gonna drop the racial minorities under them, right? And there's these hierarchies where you got people like Aristotle and his climate theory, who says, well, you got these people that come from these extreme temperatures, where black people, they come from extreme hot. You got these pasty white people that comes from extreme cold. They're inferior to us people that are, I guess, middle colored, right? They're inferior to us because those who live in these extreme areas, they're dumb, they're lazy, they're incapable of governing themselves. So we have to do it for us. But at the root of it all goes back to classism, rich versus poor. Then there's this divide and conquer. They use the motherfucking Beacon's rebellion tactics, right? They use Beacon's tactics where they cause division amongst the ranks, because at the end of the day, the poor people outnumber the rich. Look at our numbers. Over 90% of the US population is poor, struggling. But then you got niggas who think they're doing better than other people because they're like, well, I ain't struggling like you. But nigga, you still poor. Your debt to income ratio is still high. You know what I'm saying? It may not look like mine, but it exists. We're all struggling. We're all oppressed. When you talk to white people, poor white people, they got complaints too. How their education systems are raggedy. How they ain't got no money to keep up with the little bitty properties that right around, you can look around in these rural areas, these remote places. Most of New York State is impoverished. And ain't no black people out there in counties like Livingston County. I won't say there's none, but there's very little. It's predominantly poor white people, and they're it's rich versus poor. And what they do is that the people in positions of power convince the poor white people, you're above the black people, you're different from them. Let's give you the jobs we call you slave catchers, and then we'll transition you into becoming police officers, right? And you police the racial minorities because you're above them, even though, black people literally came up with the term white trash, which means, hold on, white dude, you're white. Why are you struggling in life just like I am? You know what I'm saying? You don't own property. You don't even have slaves. You inadequate white person. See, for me, my excuse is the color of my skin. I'm being exploited and oppressed because I'm black. But what's your excuse, poor white man?
Not well.
Not
right?
well.
Not well. And so, for example, Sowell has a book called Black Rednecks, White Liberals. Okay? And his whole point
So he's just the older version of Candace Owens? Gotcha.
is that, you know, if you actually, and, you know, again, like Sowell is, you know, he researches the shit out of this stuff.
How would he know? He wasn't even able to tell us, you know, his background. He just skipped past it because he don't know his background. All he knows is that this dude has some research out there that fits how his mind is set up. It fits his narrative. He's not going to use data that refutes that, because there's ample amount of data that refute this Powell dude, but he ain't using none of that. Why? Because it doesn't fit his narrative.
He really does his work. Now, if you look at the experience of African Americans after slavery, they start to make real progress, right? And a large part of the reason why they make progress is because you start to get a lot of people from New England, either, you know, black people from New England or white people from New England, who come down and sort of reshape the culture. They create these schools and they're teaching those New England values, right? It's those Puritan values of hard work, tenacity, all of that sort of stuff. And so there's all this progress. And you have people like Booker T. Washington, and Booker T. Washington was an actual slave. And
This nigga must have never heard of the exception in the rule, you know what I'm saying, concept, where you cannot use people that are the exception and try to generalize them as the motherfucking rule. The amount of successful black individuals, they're exceptions, they're rare. The rich population is tiny, right? But when you look at the wealthy black people compared to the wealthy white people, they're just as outnumbered as poor blacks to poor whites. Ain't nothing new under the sun, man.
then after he got his freedom, he got to go work in a salt mine, which is literally the worst job ever. And in Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery, he tells this great story about seeing a schoolhouse, right? And that, you know, he thought that going into a schoolhouse was about as close to heaven on earth as you could get.
Whoa.
Like, this is a dude who wanted an education really, really badly. And that's a lot of what you find in the, you know, early black experience in, you know, the post-slavery period. And in fact, you know, blacks.
Because a lot of these people were educated when you pulled them here. Oh my goodness. Black people were enslaved, was forced not to read. I mean, people make fun of black people for not, literally, historically not being able to swim. But peep this, and you can Google it. White people prevented black people from learning how to swim, getting in water because of what? They did not want to risk losing their property by them swimming away to their freedom. So historically, you got generations of black people who don't know how to swim, fearful of the water, because you had these people who literally pushed us into these spaces. We're going to push you into this lack of education. I mean, you literally had educated motherfucking black people that came here. There were still slaves that were teaching other black people how to read because they knew how to read. It's just they had to do it in secret because you literally could be murdered. Murdered. Oh, the ignorance.
You know, before sort of World War II actually had higher rates of marriage than whites. All of these sorts of things that, you know, are now.
Of course, of course. You needed to motherfreaking solidify you having slaves. I mean, the term mother effer came from the fact that slave owners were making their sons have sex with their mothers just so they can have more babies to work their land. Me personally, growing up, I didn't even though there was a attraction to black people, I was fearful of dating black people because literally every family reunion I was going to, you related to this, you related to this, you related to Scotts, you related to Greens, you related to Smiths, you related to Browns, you related to Wilsons, you related to motherfucking Tisdales, you related to Moores and motherfucking Anderson. And I'm just like, bro, I'm just related to all black people. You got to take into consideration. They took black people from the same few countries in Africa, brought them here. And this was during the time where America wasn't as big as it is now. The population in America was like maybe 1 million. Well, to be fair, we'll say about 2 million. If you add the whites and the blacks, the natives, you know, the Native Americans and the Native Mexicans, it was about 2 million, we'll say. But it wasn't that many, it wasn't as big as it is now. And that's me being generous. It's more like closer to like a couple 100,000, right? And you put them in this concentrated place, and you got to remember, colonial America, it was 13 colonies. And over a span of time, they started making more colonies, right? In the beginning, it was just Virginia and motherfucking Carolina, and then it became New York, and then the 13 colonies. You had black people concentrated in the same places. And a lot of the times you had people, you was pulling people from the same tribes, sitting them on these plantations, breeding them, and then you sell them, bring some more people, breed them, and it was just a cesspool of breeding. This tiny amount of people who 9 times out of 10 were all related. But the ignorance this nigga he spews, and then those that want to believe this stuff continue to share it. I'm so glad you weirdos sent me this, because I need to obliterate this, because a lot of y'all white people share the same broken knowledge. And if you pick up a motherfucking book that's outside of your comfort zone, then you'll learn. I mean, even I read Candace Owen and conservative materials so I can understand those who don't share my views. And don't try to deem me as no, oh, you liberal and ain't no Democrat. I am me.
Supposedly a problem. And then there's this turnaround, right? The black experience starts to go south, right? It starts to get worse.
And what year is this around?
This is post World War II, right?
He don't even know the year. Post World War II is so broad. I mean, 2022 is post World War II.
So post slavery, black people experience a rebounding.
They're starting to make some progress. There's ambition.
Progress.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, if in terms of books to read, like, you know.
This nigga must have never heard of the black codes. He must have never heard of the Jim Crow laws. I mean, we were making progress. The progress was so incremental. It was so tiny. So tiny. I mean, I don't understand how slavery ended over 400 years ago, and yet you still have majority of the black population poor, uneducated, and still oppressed. We still worse off compared to our lighter skinned motherfucking counterparts. I mean, here's some data for you. You could Google it. Black people and people with Afrocentric features are more likely to be arrested, charged, convicted, and punished more harshly compared to those with white skin and European features. In fact, a white man with a criminal record, criminal history, is more likely to be hired on a job compared to a black man with no criminal record. Black people are disproportionately incarcerated. Now, racial minorities in general are disproportionately incarcerated compared to white people. However, I'm talking about black people right now. Black people, we only make up 13% of the U.S. population. White people make up 60%. Out of almost 340 million people in the U.S., over 100 million of those people are white. Black people, we only make up about 44 million of the population. Yet, when you look at the jails and the prisons, right, there are just about as much black people sitting in there as white, if not more. Yet we make up a smaller portion of the U.S. compared to white people. But according to this nigga, black people's just been doing stellar post-slavery.
Because a large part of what I'm trying to do in general is really let's move to the place of all people are created equal. Like, let's remove all these stupid distinctions.
No, you're not doing that when you're trying to say that black culture isn't black culture, but in fact white culture. You're still putting distinctions out there, you idiot.
Right, and really live that principle. And the problem is that in order to really live that principle, you need a new narrative that beats slavery. So, you know, it's not, if you
How you get a new narrative that beats slavery? Slavery existed. You cannot just act like slavery never happened. Jim Crow laws, literally, even after black people were freed, they came up with this grandfather clause for voting where it said, like, because black people was like, oh, I'm free, so let me go vote. Then they're like, hold on, nah, bro. You can only vote if your granddaddy voted. Now, black people were incapable of voting since they got here. So who granddaddy post-slavery was voting? So that still left black people to not be able to vote. Why? Because they didn't have a granddaddy that voted. But some poor white people could vote because why? They more than likely had a granddaddy that voted at one point. Ugh. Jim Crow laws existed. Jim Crow laws existed. This nigga just want to act like this stuff ain't never happened. You cannot grow and move forward trying to act like the past never happened. We're just going to end up repeating it.
go and talk to racists, you can't just say racism is bad. Like, that doesn't destroy racism, right? What destroys racism is when you make sense of the things that they know, right? They see, you know, people who are violent in the ghettos, or they see crime.
Violent in the ghettos. Y'all act like y'all ain't violent in motherfucking impoverished neighborhood. And then what is pissing me off is that people want to use the term ghetto as if it's synonymous to black people. The term ghetto was created for white people. Ghettos is where they put poor white people, motherfucking Ashkenazi Jews. I'm saying Ashkenazi because they're not the real Jews, but Ashkenazi Jews, right? Into these ghettos, which was literally just ran down concentration camps that they did not have resources and they was left to fend for themselves.
Or they see a lack of education, or they see that Africa is poor, and you're able to tell a better.
This nigga just tried to say a whole continent is poor. Oh my goodness. What school did you go to, dude? I got a community college background. I got a public city school district background. And yet, I'm more intelligent than you. It gotta be his white skin.
Story that makes sense of the things that they know, but also comes out with the conclusion, oh, we actually all have the same potential. Right.
But if you have this issue with people imitating their atmosphere and imitating their environment and this Southern style talk with the Southern redneck influence on the African American.
Southern redneck influence had nothing to do with nothing, because at the end of the day, black people was not in spaces with poor white people like that. The most we came in contact with poor white people were slave catchers. And then when they motherfreaking transitioned, you know, like Night Watch was the original, the history of policing. And then they centralized police and they turned them into what they are known now as the police. That's the most we came in contact with poor white people. Black people were on the plantations of wealthy white people. Poor white people were called white trash because they were inadequate white people. They did not have the same opportunity, resources, and such as wealthy white people. We literally came up with that term, white trash. My ancestors, black people, because they like, I know why I am oppressed, but what's wrong with you, white man, white woman, white child?
And slaves, former slaves. How do you stop that, and how do you turn that around?
Well, in general, for humanity, I mean, this is sort of a big problem for humanity in general, is that there's not a culture alive today that is well suited to the world that we're living in. And that's because, you know, culture is adapted.
If anybody was stealing people culture, it was motherfucking white people. When white people came here, we didn't have all these buildings and everything. It was just pure trees, lands, and rough nature, right? Then white people came here trying to find, you know, land and gold and money and all this other stuff. But when they came here, look into it. You could literally Google it. When white people came here, the Quakers, you know, all them, these niggas, they came here, they didn't know how to thrive in American, I don't know what it was called then, but they didn't know how to thrive in colonial American times, right? So what they did was play friendly with the Native Americans, and they appropriated their culture. They are the ones who looked on to, and oh, you got some farmland over here. You know how to, you know, navigate these lands because you lived here all this time. Well, let me play nice with you so I can learn everything that you know. And then after I learn this, you know, I'm setting up these agreements, and then I turn around, break the agreement, and then I massacre your whole family, all the tribes surrounding, and then I act like we did it all. That's white people.
Adapted to environment in the same way as any evolutionary thing, right? So, for example, you know, if you look at, like, let's talk about these hunter-gatherers, right? The Yanomamo or something like that. So there's a great story in The Lost City of Z where, you know, Percy Fawcett, who was an explorer, comes across.
Like I said earlier, you cannot compare West Indies to America. Colonial America literally engaged in civil war because they didn't want to end slavery. We were the last country to end it. And then it's not even ended because the 13th Amendment allows the enslavement of those that are incarcerated.
Across, you know, all these tribes in the Amazon. And one of the examples that the author gives in there is David Gran. He talks about how, you know, there's this group of tribesmen in the Amazon, and what they'll do is there's this special leaf, and they go and they squeeze this leaf, right? They crush it up, and this milky substance runs into the water. And then all of a sudden, the fish float up to the surface upside down, right? They've been anesthetized by this whatever substance in the leaf. And this little boy goes into the river and he plucks out all the fattest fish. And then as the milky cloud dissipates, the other fish swim away, right? Impressive as fuck. Like, how the fuck do these tribesmen who don't have science, don't have any of these things, figure this thing out? And it's cultural evolution. That's what happens, is that that's the nature of evolution. That's the nature of markets, because markets are an evolutionary process. You know, intelligent answers and intelligent solutions can emerge from just sort of competing forces. And so all of these cultures are well adapted to a particular environment. So if you, like we talked about American culture and we talked about Russian culture.
You can't say that people are well adapted to the environment they're in and then try to make it seem like black culture was just pulled from white people. Like, no. Black culture, for what we know it is today, is a mixture of African culture and the culture that we created out of our oppression. Rap was literally created out of oppression. Poems written by black people out of oppression. So a lot of the songs that y'all enjoy, jazz, was formed out of oppression. That is us expressing ourselves through our arts. Literally, in Africa, people think it's crazy, but there's things like music, dance, you know, even diplomacy, your intelligence. This stuff is tailored to the tribes that you come from. So even in America, even though you got black people that are so detached from Africa, you know, their African roots, genetically, we still participate in a lot of the same stuff that our, you know, kinfolk across the water does. Because why? Genetics is what ties us. It ain't got squat to do with you white folk. Stupid.
Russian culture selects for pessimism. American culture, because you had to move all the way across the ocean, right? If you've got villages in Italy, you know, Vietnam, whatever it is, who is the person in that village who says, I'm going to go across the ocean to a country I know nothing about and, you know, make a fortune, right? It's the most optimistic individual. And so it's basically a magnet for...
Ain't the most optimistic, it's the nigga with money.
All the most optimistic individuals in the world. The analogy I always use is, do you ever see American Tail? The, like, old animated movie from, like, must be the 90s or whatever? Probably.
I don't think I saw.
That wasn't even a good description. That's why this nigga got this, like, what are you talking about face? Joe Rogan don't know squat. He doesn't know squat. He's like yourself. He reads material that fits his narrative, that fits his comfort. And then he lets on you weirdos. Because I rarely see him bring on someone that challenges these conservative mindsets, right? Very rarely. Or he pulls in just mostly white people.
Oh, that.
Well, it's about a group of...
it was animated?
It's animated, yeah.
Who made it?
I don't know. Trying to remember. It's not Disney. That's it.
No, I don't think I saw that.
Oh, Steven Spielberg. Well, anyway, it's sort of about the immigrant experience more generally, and then specifically sort of about the...
This nigga comparing life to a cartoon movie that was created by a white man. Wow. Yes, that's very factual when you're talking about blackness and black culture.
Russian Jewish experience. And it's about this family, the Mouskovitzes. And right there on that trunk, there's Fievel Mouskowitz. And Fievel Mouskowitz, in the first part, they're in Russia, and they're all being persecuted by cats, right? Because they're mice. And Fievel Mouskowitz sings a song with all of the other Mouskowitzes called "There Are No Cats in America," right? Which is so much of what the American immigrant experience is about, right? You're like,
the white American immigrant experience is about, Italians are called WAPs, which is people without papers. Because when you look at Ellis Island, majority of those white people who be like, yeah, my family came here legally. They did it the right way. No. No. Immigration and the criminalization of immigrants is something that is mostly felt upon by mother freaking racial minorities. White people, y'all tend to just come over here and they just like, hey, bring them in. Even Trump said it. Trump was like, we don't want immigrants from these random places. We want the Swedish immigrants. We want the white ones. The white ones.
oh, it's all going to be perfect, land of opportunity, the streets are paved with gold, except in An American Tail, the streets are paved with cheese.
American T-A-L.
Yeah, exactly.
E or T-A-I-L?
T-A-I-L. Yeah, T-A-I-L.
Tail, like rat
right,
tail.
Exactly.
Okay, mouse tail.
So these different environments, right? Just as you have different environments select for different beaks or wings or whatever it is, select for different mindsets, different ways of thinking, different cultural traits, right? And what ends up happening is that we become well adapted to a particular environment. So what happens to the point of the Lost City of Z is what happened to all of these European explorers who went into the Amazon? Well, a lot of them fucking died. And that's because they're doing things that are well suited to England, like walking around in wool suits and eating cans of chipped beef. But suddenly when you're in the 100-degree heat of the Amazon and there's all these animals you don't understand and you don't know how to use the plants that you squeeze and have the anesthetic in them and all that sort of stuff, you can't survive, right? And what they called in the Lost City of Z, all the explorers, they called it the Amazon a counterfeit paradise. It looked like a paradise. It was so lush. It was so tropical.
Just for the record, black people did not get their culture from no redneck white folk. It didn't happen. Did not. Because rednecks didn't even own slaves. The most they did was slave patrols. That's it. And they hated slaves because they're like, oh, you're stealing our jobs. It's the same garbage that they say now with Mexican immigrants and other immigrants. You're stealing our job. And technically, no, they're not stealing your job. The nigga that you used to work for was like, I don't want to pay you. I don't want to give you benefits because you're a citizenship. You have citizenship. Or I am kind of forced to make sure that you're taken care of. Where with these people, I can make the most profit off of them by exploiting them because one, they lack citizenship, which is why black people were stripped of citizenship and we were deemed property. So they didn't have to do the things that you have to do to citizens, which is provide them an adequate, habitable life. Continue.
But they were like, there's nothing to fucking eat. Except clearly there was, because Amazonian people had been living there for tens of thousands of years. The Westerners didn't have the cultural software that was well suited to surviving in that environment.
So how does this translate into African Americans?
So what is the environment that created that Southern redneck culture? And the environment, it turns out, is herding. Right? So raising sheep, raising goats, and all that sort of stuff. Because most of the people who are in the South originally came from the Scots-Irish. And when you look at herding cultures around the world, they all have certain traits in common, right? So if you're a herder, you have a big, big problem. And that big, big problem is property rights. So if you're a farmer, there are clear boundaries on my land. Now, there are ways you can try and fuck me. You can try and move the boundary stones on my land slowly into your field over. But, you know, what we usually have is we have some sort of government. There's a local town official that we go to, and he is responsible for policing the boundaries. And so towns would do things where, you know, you would essentially all get together and we go walk the boundary stones. And we make sure that...
Surveyor. This dude is so dumb, he don't even know what a surveyor is. He knows the description of it, but not what it's called.
None of those boundary stones had moved. So the intuition of people from the North, Puritans, people like that, is if we have a problem, we go to the government. We resolve it through the government, right?
Those are rich people problems, because poor people can't, the government law only works in one direction, down. It doesn't go up, right? As a black person, you know what I'm saying? And as somebody that is not wealthy, if I was to have an issue with a white person that is wealthy and call the police, guess the freak what the police gonna do? Nigga, we don't give a damn about you.
In the environment of herding, you can come over and you can steal my sheep. And you can mix the sheep in with your flock, and I have no way to prove which sheep are my sheep. So we evolve things like branding, right? Where I have a brand, I put it on my sheep and all that sort of stuff. But there's another strategy that is used that evolved before branding.
Which black people, slaves, were branded.
And that earlier strategy is being a crazy motherfucker. You establish a reputation as the kind of guy that you don't fuck with. You come on my land, I kill you. You touch my sheep or my women, I fucking kill you. And I use such an aggressive level of violence.
See, he's just described close proximity, because who's gonna come on your land and try to take your stuff or move your rocks? Somebody right next to you, which 9 times out of 10, niggas who, he said it himself, it was, what, Irish people herdsmen? Oh, this sounds like Irish on Irish crime, white on white crime.
That you know that, you know, there is no point in fucking with, I mean, this is not plausible because I'm saying it, but let's imagine a much tougher person. Conor McGregor, for example, is a great example. You don't fuck with Conor McGregor, right? He has a reputation as just being a badass motherfucker who will fuck you up, right?
Right. So that's how you keep people off your land.
That's right. And if you look at, let's look at a couple of herder cultures. So herder cultures include the Scots-Irish, who are the rednecks. Herder cultures include the Mongolians, right? The Mongols, notoriously a very gentle, peace-loving people, right? And they include the Bedouins, who are the Arabs, right? Who had camels and all of that sort of stuff. And you'll notice that there is that same use of violence. And mostly...
there's also herdsmen in Africa. I mean, come on. You ain't never heard of shepherd? The Bible literally originates from Africa. But we just gonna act like...
They fight amongst themselves. There's this interclan warfare. But periodically, a charismatic figure emerges who unites the clans. So Genghis Khan manages to unite the Mongols. And then what do the Mongols proceed to do? They proceed to go use that aggressive use of violence. They have those horses which allow them to move quickly, right? And they're really effective. And they go and they fuck everybody up. Right? Because, you know, the gentle farmers of China aren't prepared for that. And the gentle farmers of Persia aren't prepared for that. What happens with the Arabs? The Arabs are mostly fighting amongst themselves. But then along comes this charismatic figure with a new belief system that unites them, Muhammad. And he unites them, and suddenly they fuck everybody up. And they create this great empire, the Caliphate, right? That spreads all across Central Asia and the Middle East and all across North Africa. Right? And in many ways, that is what Donald Trump is. They've been, you know, the rednecks have been fighting amongst themselves for a long time. And then Donald Trump, the Genghis Khan of America, the Muhammad of America, has succeeded in uniting the clans. And, you know, in our time, you don't do it by going out and like raping and pillaging. You go and you seize the ballot box and you vote. And, you know, you really like take back power. And so that's what they've done. But there are, if you look, there are certain problems that occur across these herder cultures. So if you're, you know, as a friend of mine who...
So you're essentially saying that the South is, that the reason why Donald Trump has been elected is because of the South, because of the herder culture.
Well, and it's also, so if you've read Hillbilly Elegy, J.D. Vance's book,
no.
It's excellent, right? But he's really talking about this hillbilly culture. And so it's not just the South, right? So what happened is that
It's rednecks.
It's rednecks, which is or whatever, or hillbillies or whatever you want to call them.
Simple folk.
Well, it's not even simple folk. It's just a particular culture, and they have certain values. And it's also worth clarifying because of the way that I sound and where I come from, and the fact that I went to Harvard.
Vitamin.
And vitamin. Then that I'm not a part of that.
He's would have been the type that had slaves, right? Not no motherfucking rednecks. Rednecks is just these people on the outside that's angry because they're like, oh, you brought these people here to take our jobs. No, they brought us here to take your job. We didn't come here willingly. You know what I'm saying? No. No.
A tribe that, Americans owe a tremendous debt to the hillbilly culture. And that tremendous debt is that overwhelmingly they are the people who have served in the military. And they are overwhelmingly the people who have fought our wars and bled and died and all of that sort of stuff.
It's just poor people. It's rich versus poor.
That's not a stuff that, I may sound like.
A lot of black people fought in the wars. And the crazy part about it, black people were fighting in wars before it was even legal to allow them to be there. It wasn't up until I think it was 1943 or something like that, that I think black men were legally allowed to fight in the Marine Corps. I mean, and then black people been fighting in these wars just like Native Americans, just like Mexicans. The only thing is that we were viewed as property, so we didn't get recognition. I have ancestors who they're still alive to this day. They're pushing 100, right? These people are 90, 91, 92, 93. And these people literally nobody even knows their real age. They could be older, they could be slightly younger. We've even had ancestors that has passed who did not know their age because there was no documentation. Because you were viewed like cattle. They're not documenting your birth. A lot of them weren't even born in hospitals. They were born on the plantation. Or if you go slightly post-slavery, they were born on sharecropper motherfucking fields. My dad, who was only 59 years old, was a sharecropper. He has memories as young as 4 and 5 years old working as a sharecropper, which sharecroppers are nothing but legal slaves. They got rid of slavery and then was then that's when they put all these, these black laws and Jim Crow laws and all this other stuff. And they said, well, black people, y'all lazy motherfuckers, y'all need a job or you'll be incarcerated. And that's how they started filling up the jails and prisons with black people. High incarceration rate. You done freed the black people. And then now it's well, you need a job. And now it's illegal to not have a job. So you're getting arrested. So then what they do, they're forced to go into sharecropping. But sharecropping is now, you can live on my land, which is a plantation at one point. But you have to work for it. Which the work consisted of you farming their lands, dealing with their cattle, raising their children. My grandmother literally raised white people's children. My dad's mother was titty in the mouth of a white baby, working as a sharecropper. My dad is pissed because he grew up his mother passed when he was 11 years old. My dad didn't really have a relationship with his mom. He was pissed because his mother, he felt that he wasn't raised by his mom, but his mom was out here raising white people. There's black people who literally have hate towards white people because of the stuff that they put us through. My dad hates white people because of the way that his bring up. He feels that not only that white people contribute to the death of his mother, but they contributed to his dad. My granddad served in the Vietnam War, developed PTSD, and then was not able to utilize VA benefits. My granddad he didn't buy no house. He didn't get to go to school. He didn't get no disability, none of that stuff. He got the PTSD. He was beating my grandmother. He was beating all his kids, cheating on them, got all these kids, getting drunk, trying to chase his PTSD away. But then y'all want to make it seem like slavery is over. These are effects that happens on people. And my daddy was working as a sharecropper, getting passed along in the child services, going from foster home to foster home because his dad was motherfucking lost his mind. He lost his mom at 11. And his older siblings was like, I'm out of here because this life is stressful. Literally, all my aunts and uncles moved from down south up north because they don't want nothing to do with that southern mentality. Nothing. There's a lot of negative history that's attached to it. A lot of negative. And my dad was a sharecropper. You working on their lands to live. Then you need the equipment to work the lands. Well, they charging you for that too.
Like a liberal, but I don't really sit in either of those cultures, right? I can critique the liberal culture and I can critique the hillbilly culture.
Liberals in hillbilly culture are almost simultaneous. The only difference is that white people or poor white people tend to flock to Republican or conservative culture because liberals or Democrats was like, oh, we got this new group of people that we need to start reaching and market towards. And then it's the inclusion of blacks. And when you racist and don't like somebody, you ain't gonna join a group that they are part of. Why you think there's barely any black people in these social clubs, gun clubs? These are spaces made for white people, made by white people.
Right? And, you know, white liberals, the whole reason why I started this thing off is because white liberals have their own weird things that are dysfunctional and that aren't helping black people and all that stuff.
If you just wore a bow tie, people would think you were conservative. That's all you have to do.
Well, then there you go. Or maybe you have a detachable bow tie.
A bolo tie, 100%.
Actually, I would like to do that. Like, I like the Texan culture.
You're a rancher.
Yeah, it's a rancher.
You have a little piece of jade right there.
Do you mean pull a George W. Bush, be from Connecticut, but dressed like a cowboy?
He was from Maine.
Yeah,
even
exactly.
more crazy.
I mean, there you have it. It's ignorance, you know? Hopefully you take something from the opposing perspectives and, you know, even if you don't change your mind and you still believe one way or the other, hey, at least it's out there. God bless.